again, YouTubers. Time to look at another Swedish Dansband album that is well worth having, maybe even worth listening to among the many active dansband haters in this country. Who knows? So, last video I talked about Kurtagers and their album in Symphony. I mentioned Streaplers a couple of times in the video about them, and Streaplers was a band who also came from Gothenburg. They started as a rock band as early as 1959 as Little Gert and the Streaplers. There were many rock stars in Sweden in the late 50s with the prefix little for some reason. Little Gert was the same guy as Gert Längstrand, who helped producing the Kurtagers album that I talked about in the previous video. The longest serving members of the Streaplers were the twins Håkan and Göran Liljeblad on bass and guitar, keyboard player, singer and leader Lasse Larsson, and drummer and singer Björn Lundqvist. That lineup played for, well, that was 4/5 of the Streaplers lineup for around 25 years. It was a vocalist that changed a couple of times. Gert Längstrand was the first singer, and with him Streaplers were quite popular and successful rock band in the 60s. The latter part of the 60s were a bit turbulent when they both changed vocalists quite often, and also decided to continue as a dance band, which was more or less the fate of many pop bands of the 60s. By 67, 68, pop bands were considered passé in Sweden, and they either had to reform, become solo artists, or continue as, well, dance bands. Well, they had to quit. Many of them quit as well. Well, but when Streaplers' fifth vocalist, Ove Pilebo, joined the group in 1970, 70, they've changed singers that often, things became a bit more steady, and the 1970s will become a very successful decade for the Streaplers. They recorded several albums that sold gold for the Polydor label and had many hits. They also built this recording studio Bohus, also mentioned in the Kurtagers video, and will be mentioned many more times, I'm quite sure of that. They became a popular studio for recording many artists and groups, and still active today, even if I don't think Streaplers has anything, I don't think they are involved in it anymore. In 1977 to 78, Streaplers even tried running their own record label. When I think 76, they started back in 76 actually. Bohus Gramophone. And yes, the Kurtagers album was released on that label, and so was the Streaplers album that I'm going to talk about now. And it's this one. Streaplers Speed from 1978. Yes, well, this was an album mostly with songs in Swedish, not just the covers but also the original songs. That's a bit unexpected and uncommon in dance band music. Perhaps Streaplers tried to get some international attention with this album, who knows. The album was recorded in the autumn of 1978, and the producer was Lars O. Karlsson, a man who produced lots of dance band albums. First, he was the main producer at Bert Karlsson's label Marianne Records, but he also produced many of the successful albums by Ingmar Nordström's from the mid-70s up until the early 80s. I'm going to get back to them later. Okay, so what's on this album? Well, when first listening to this album, it's easy to get put off by the album starter in an awful cover version of the Black Gorilla hit Gimme That Banana. If some of you may recognize and remember that song, I mean, to be quite honest, the original version wasn't that brilliant either. Actually, I had a look at it on YouTube the other day just to form an opinion, and oh my goodness, everything wasn't better back in time. Some stuff were actually quite awful. So I usually skip that first track, but never mind. Don't worry, it gets better. The second track is a very inspired cover version of the South African girl band Clout's big hit Substitute. A song that I've always liked, with drummer Björn Lundqvist, that's this guy, on lead vocals, and the crispness of the recording and convincing vocals makes the Streaplers cover version slightly better than the South African original. It's very well recorded, I have to say that. And it's a good song. It would become a hit in Sweden with the Swedish singer Isabella Scorupco in the early 90s again. But of course it was an old original by the group Clout. Or Clute. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. I don't think I've ever heard that name being said. I've just heard the group. Okay, well, then after some current pop songs, I mean songs that were popular back in 1978, it's time for a trip back to the 50s. Such trips were quite common in the late greasy 70s. Ove Pilebo, the main lead singer, sings a cover of the Elvis Presley song I Was the One. And it's done in great style, even if I would not even dare think that Ove could compete with Elvis. Well, in 1978 he could have competed with, for obvious natural reasons. Just 2 songs on the album had Swedish lyrics, and one was a cover of Mr. Can't You See from the repertoire of Glenn Jarbrough and Buffy St. Marie. Originally it's a Mickey Newberry song, and I cannot say that Streaplers' rather moderate and bleak version can compete with any other previously mentioned versions. I mean, it's a very good song, but the Streaplers version is rather boring, uninspired. Anyway, and the Swedish lyrics about sitting in a boat and singing is quite horrible compared to the emotional lyrics of the original version as well, so let's leave that aside. So, after that mishap, Streaplers take on Cliff Richard's Living Doll, but with a fast up-tempo rock arrangement, and you can really tell that they used to be one of the best rock bands in Sweden of the early 60s when you hear their Living Doll cover. Side A closes with an original ballad called Can't Forget What You've Done, and I have to say that the original songs stand up quite well musically and emotionally on this album. I was even surprised when I saw that it wasn't original, since it could have worked on any 1970s country album from Nashville. I can imagine Kenny Rogers singing, doing quite a good cover of that song. I don't think he has, but he could have, at least back then.
Hurt me so bad when you left me.
Okay, well, side B then starts with an up-tempo original song called Susanna, composed by singer and songwriter Anders Glenmark, who both had a successful career as a singer in the 70s, but even more as a producer and artist in the 80s and 90s. Glenmark composed 4 of the 6 tracks on the B-side, and they are generally quite inspired songs that are well played and sung by the Streaplers. But after the Susanna, we got the cover of, do you remember this one? Plastic Bertrand's cover song, Ça plaint pour moi. That's another attempt by the Streaplers to stay modern and rocky, but I cannot imagine that the dancing audience were too keen to dance to that song, since I would say it's a bit too fast to dance to, but it works perfectly to jump up and down wildly while shaking your arms. But is it really what dance bands is all about? Not sure about that. Anyway, many of the recording dance bands try to modernize their styles by including rock and disco to their repertoire in the latter part of the 70s. Most of the attempts weren't that impressive. I wouldn't say that Streaplers' version of Ça plaint pour moi is bad, but it doesn't really fit into their style nor the soundscape of the album. Another Anders Glenmark composition follows, the country-tinged number Her Train Is Leaving, and it works much better. Danceable, steady, and all in all good dance band country song. The keyboard player and leader, Lasse Larsson, usually sings at least one song on each album, and his vocal number on Speed is a cover of Carl Mann's hit Pretend from 1959, And unlike the previous visit back to the days of the oldies, like Living Doll, Streaplers' version of Pretend is fairly straightforward, in the same style as Carl Mann did it back then. It must have been a very popular version, since it's one of the few songs from this album that stayed on the Streaplers' repertoire for a longer time. I've seen them play this song, Pretend, on TV back in the late 80s, maybe, probably even in the 90s. So it stayed on the song list for a long time. Not sure if it's there today. Lasse Larsson is not in the band anymore. He passed away in 2004. His son has taken over, by the way. Yeah. But what one could say it's a timeless classic, this song, since Alvin Stardust had a bit of a hit with the same song a couple of years after this Streaplers recording. Yeah, well, two decent original numbers composed by Anders Glenmark again finishes off the album. Jag måste börja om, second song in Swedish, and Come Back Tomorrow. They are both played in a country style with a hint of begin or rumba rhythm in the previous song. I've drawn many parallels to the Kurt Hager's album, and funnily enough, I bought this album, even though it's actually not this copy. This is a later copy. I bought this Streaplers album the very same day as the Kurt Hager's album sometime in the mid-80s, so it's another album that's followed me for a long time. I like most of the songs, apart from the real downers like Gimme That Banana and A Plan Pour Moi. Not really a fan of that. Especially the originals, I think, are very good. But also the crispness, the production, the sound, combined with a very full, steady bass and the really great vocals. The Streaplers has always had really great vocals. Different singers with different kinds of voice that blend in very well together. The Streaplers had some real big successes in the years leading up to this album, so it's obvious that it's a band with lots of confidence that recorded this album. But alas, as I mentioned before, by 1978, the record sales for dance bands were diminishing, going down, and that affected the Streaplers as well. But they continued to record albums and have hits. They had hits in the 80s and 90s as well, maybe even later. I haven't been following them that closely the last 10, 15 years or so. But they exist as a group today, 60 years after the start, although the last original members, the Liljeblad twins, they left after the 50th anniversary. But they managed to renew the group, and they are still popular and very much active, as I said. So, yeah. This album was also never issued on CD, but it is available from Google Play, iTunes, and Spotify. And that's it for now. Hope you found it somewhat interesting, and thanks for watching.